Hello? Yeah, we're back. It was fine. All good. A lot of the market kind of flipped red after I left, so mostly just seeing that kind of reversal finally. The chinks in the armor, so to speak, on SPY. Not particularly good looking if it continues to drop, but you never know. There wasn't any, again, one piece of like bad news or something. It's just the way it started going. I didn't see anything bad news wise. Maybe. Nice. DXF. Yeah, we'll check out DXF. I don't know what that is. Let's see what that's about. Hmm. Mm, don't like that. But yeah, I think this is it's a tricky one. I don't normally come on twice, but there was a come back to the stream twice, but there was I have a little bit of time and figured I'd just finish the day since I had a short stream this morning. This is a weird chart. This is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. What is going on here? What is this? Dunxin Financial Holdings? This thing went from like $1 to $40. I mean, just that alone, I would suggest to you it's probably going to be distributive. Pattern reminds me of what happened here, where you have like maybe a longer term version of this, maybe walking down with some up thrusts here, probably to the same region. Yeah, this is not really what you want. Well, so the big problem that I saw when I opened the screen was these three consecutive lows, and then this one specifically, as it went up first, it made a higher high and then advanced. And I can't tell, like I can't really tell if that's supposed to be like an auto reaction or what that is. This to me looked like an auto reaction, so I'm like, well then it should be fine, but what in the world is this then? Don't know. It's a really confusing chart. Um, so there's a bit of a pattern here and like where these seem to be residing. If you look at the RSI, these major push-ups are coming on these like layup moves. You can see them right there, like that. And it's a little odd to chart it like this, but I think there's another one right here that's happening. So it is jumping creeks to the Unity play. Yeah, we'll take a look. That one's come up quite a bit too, and I think I have looked at it before, but not very often. Honestly, I would just be playing this like breakout only. I don't know if there's anything else to do with it. Because right now that would be the place, but I think you have probably like another layer of that right here. So if it came above maybe $7, and we could look at local breakouts, you might have a I guess it could be sooner than that. Let's take a look. Did it break down right there? It did. And then it tried to reverse. So there's a weakness. I'm just trying to figure out what this is about. So it looks like a little bit of a weakness. Yeah, you don't want to see it do the same thing it did here, which is pretty common. If this was successful in driving the price lower, it would be a common occurrence to see it happen again. And that's what it looks like to me, is a reoccurrence of this motion. I really don't need it to be that complex. There's a bottom, it pushes high, it dipped below, and that's a weakness. And then you can see like the next thing is a hook that drops. And yeah, I mean, you can see something similar playing out. Granted, there's some things that are a little different, and the progression here obviously is farther, but yeah, there's a potential here that if this does come back down, that you get this kind of like drop again and try to like dump it backwards. So my biggest concern, I suppose, at this point would be that there's like kind of a press down pattern as well. You see that motion here. I'm not really sure why that's happening, but it's happening again right there as well. This is very similar. Actually, it might be nearly the same angle too. So perhaps we could use that as kind of a guide. Yeah, maybe like right there. Instead of using these curves, which are pretty irregular. That may make sense. So I think there's a possibility it come up to like 830. At which point, again, I'm very concerned about this motion. I don't really know what to make of this. It looks highly distributive. So this to me reads more like a cat ear from this bottom, if that makes sense. Which does support the idea that this comes back up, but that's about as far as you would take it. So this would be like a probable upthrust zone right here to recheck whatever that 4-hour 180 is, and then you come back down probably. And it wouldn't necessarily be like that fast. You could even have like multiple hits. I don't really know what it would look like, but you'd probably come back to this one at a later time. So right now, I don't know if the compressions are actually done or if it's going to try to do another version of this right here. I mean, you could easily see it doing one more or even two more, you know, forming out like a wedge. That's not very helpful. So that's what I was saying. You might want to just play it by ear with a breakout level at like 7. You'd probably play it from like 7 to 8. And then anything else is extra at this point. It looks to me like a pretty classic distribution pattern at this time. And it's probably designed to get you down to whatever, some level back here at like 4, maybe from this previous top. And that's where they were trying to get to here, and they just didn't do it. So you're trying to fabricate like multiple distributions in order to do it. And you can see there's a rise. So again, this was obviously divergent too on this bottom and this RSI. So I mean, it has a secondary move, which is kind of crazy. But that from that forward, it just looks like a pretty classic potential distribution pattern. And if it's not distribution, then I guess this could have been a spring, but you'd have to see like an SOS here where it comes above this top, which is $9. And you could still have a backup to the creek, but that would need to happen. So you could have a pretty deep backup here, but that would need to happen. I'm not seeing how that could be the case right now. So this also looks a lot like a diamond, and I don't talk about diamond patterns that often. They typically are not hyper symmetrical. You do find them here and there as being fairly symmetrical. But the height of the diamond pattern to the bottom is kind of your breakout zone. And that starts up here on this push, the second push to the bottom. So it's defining a range movement, and that's going to end up breaking out somehow later. And then usually there's a pretty clear and evident path, and there is right there. It's not always perfectly equivalent, but there is sometimes a strong similarity in the two. So it should be similar, and it is. This is 146, and this is 148. Very, very similar. So that's 148. 148. So you can see it's coming right to the end of that pattern right now. So it's narrowing in. So with this being said, diamonds are very, very reliable patterns if they break. I find that if it's going to do a fake out, it usually does it as in a distribution. So again, if this were to fake out, it would probably go, because it's right on the tip right now. Maybe it's a good play either way, because you could play downside as well. You'd probably be in good shape. But I could see this dropping really far. It must be aiming for something like over here, like something like that. Not sure. That's really low. That's like $2. There must be some reason. I can't tell with the gobbledygook here. It looks like maybe it's this. I can't really tell. It's hard to tell on this chart. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there's like all these little wicks or these little bars that are just out in the middle of nowhere. They're not connected at all on the 4 hour. I think this is the last one. So that might be the target in mind. That makes sense. That's a big gap level. And there are more gaps below. But initially, like 240 seems reasonable. That would be potential for disasters. So usually what we find is that there's some kind of a level that would be the top. In this case, it's a 50% marker on that. You can see that 50% is the top. So if it's going to fake out, it would go up to the top, again, above that $8 area, maybe $8.30, and then pretty much at that point just kind of crap out. That's where the cat ears kind of come into play here, 1 and then 2. See how they're laying down, and then they would come back up, and if they fail here, then you've got a strong chance it's going to reverse hard the other way. And then the timing on that bottom, I usually would look at this top through this bottom, but in this case, I think it's actually this line. It's not actually going all the way through the peak because they set it up way far away from that buying climax. I think it's here. So that could be by August 5th. And I'd have to take a look and see if that matches, but it may, I don't know. Exit and entry on these are usually pretty similar. It doesn't really look like it matches, does it? So I don't think we can use that. So this is 62 degrees. And they're usually fairly close to right. So when I've done them before, they do work quite nicely when they do break the right direction. The problem is the reversal is hard to track, you know. It may start on a a good note, and it seemed like it has a lot of strength. Before you know it, it's like kind of dying. It looks like that is their target region right there. So yeah, for both of these, the targets are very reasonable here and here. That makes sense. So this is the diamond. It's trying to determine which direction it's going to go. And the break point is like 660. I don't know if there's a good way to trade this outside of just reactive trading, because you could set up a kind of, I don't know, double trade here, but I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how to set it up in this case. So anywho, the exit trajectory would also be very similar if it drops. So like I said, I think there's a possibility it has the initial push to the upside even, or vice versa, where you could go down first, then back up. That's just a reversal pattern. That's always part of it. But on the whole, you're looking at then only really a couple different possibilities. So one would be here, and then one would be probably here, right off that. So my thought is direction is likely going to be determined pretty soon, because it's obviously at the very edge of its thing. It's having a little bit of trouble to the upside. So because see how it made that weakness? Looks like it wants to try to go down. The RSI is sitting in the middle, could go either way. It's consolidated. This actually looks the same pattern-wise, like a widening and then a narrowing. It's ready to go. Diamond continuation is tough though, because it is a big move, just the same as a reversal. And then there's some rare circumstances where the reversal doesn't happen until after a second buy up. That's like a UTAD. That's what happened to us on AMC in August of 2022. We had a diamond pattern and it did break to the upside. And in that case, what happened is it was essentially like a half move. It went from what I would call like the center, liquid center, which I think is actually right where we are, not way up here. It went from like liquid center to the drop zone, which is like where the previous range ended. You can see right there is the bottom of the previous range. That was the measure that I used when I found the August 2022 buy up. And that was, again, it's kind of odd, but it was like not quite, yeah, that's like perfect. So see how it like goes right up to the next top? You guys are like, well, yeah, but you just measured that. I know, but the thing is like this could have been lower. And if this were lower down, I would have put it down here as well. I think it's fairly even. So it looks like it goes pretty much straight across, which is not quite how it was in AMC at that time. It was very much skewed. But that's a kind of a secondary target. That would just be a distribution, like a UTAD. It's nothing particular of note there. Nothing very interesting, I should say. So again, it's like the risk here and the reward is going to be a bit tricky. I think you would want to see a obvious, and a diamond's a diamond. I mean, what are you going to do? They tend to not have very much preferences. In this case, the widening did make higher highs, did make lower lows. The narrowing, same deal. You know, I think it's a little bit weaker on the narrowing side. You can see it push lower. It struggled, I think, to come up again. But again, that would be normal. But I would say that this could have been a little bit stronger. Like if this had come down low, you could have consolidated on this side without making like a lower low. But instead it does. So right now, just because of that, I would favor downside. I know that sounds a little weird. So it's like, well, that could be a spring and da-da-da-da-da. I know. But I would favor downside first, just as a result of that move. And I'm not sure. So again, either the head fake and then permanent downside for a while, or That downside is really just there because they need to get like a spring, in which case it's probably just going to go to like 550 and bounce. And that might be a retest, yeah, here to the bottom of that big move. That's what it looks like right there at 540. So that's reasonable as well. There's a lot of good levels here. At least it's easy enough to chart it. It's not a bad one. So this might be a bit of an oddball because I think if you bought in too early, you could be really caught off guard if it takes it up and then goes the other way. So the better way to trade it would probably be to have like a plan in mind about what you wanted to kind of achieve first. Whether that's, if I want it to go up or if I think it's going to go up, I'm going to wait and just wait till it passes this spot because it could go down and then back up. And yeah, you're missing a little bit, but ultimately these targets are pretty high. I mean, you're not going to miss that much altogether. You're going to miss some, right? But you'd have to have that conviction anyways that, yeah, it's definitely going to go up. I mean, you don't know that. This is a 60% run to the upside. But I think if you do that, you spare yourself the trouble of like buying in and having it flush and then reverse, or buying in and having it flush up. And you think it's going to be fine and then it dumps. Because honestly, again, I think it's favoring down. So down straight away doesn't mean that it has any kind of serious reversal either. Like both of these could have very similar patterns of breaking out, just going up, having a bit of an SOS here, and then a backup that comes back to maybe this creek or the previous bottom, and then goes again. I mean, so you can kind of measure it however you want to, but that certainly is a possibility. So you'd have to be careful. You know, this is just a lot of question marks, unfortunately, right now. But yes, is it a good setup for a diamond? Yeah, it's about to break. I just don't know which way. And ultimately, like, even if it goes up here, I'm most concerned that it's going to go up and distribute. It's been selling off pretty hard. Once it hits here on the RSI, you can see that would probably correlate to coming up to about 820. So if I have to pick one, I think it's possible it could just go ahead and break up and then come down. If it goes down first, maybe a greater chance that it continues, because I think there's a chance that then this is actually resetting. We just have to wait it out and see. And I think if it resets low, you could have it break back out, potentially. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Not terrible. And this is very much one of those patterns that will probably fake out either way, up or down. Like it's probably going to have some retracement down or up, like a hook versus like a backup that causes you to second guess it. That's pretty typical. Yeah. So Unity, this looks questionable. Unity is a the software program. I actually have it on my computer. I don't use it. I used to use it. I did some game design stuff in the past. I worked for a game developer at one point for about 2.5 years and did a project in Unity, and it's a good program. It had some issues in the last 5 or 6 years, but is it largely used? Yeah. I mean, even now, if you go get an indie game, every other indie game, or every like 3 or 4 indie games that you find on the, you know, whether it's the PlayStation Network or Xbox Live or Nintendo Shop, eShop, those indie games, a lot of those developers use Unity, and it's still widely used. It's open, so it's a free software for the most part to use. You can get things that are not free, but it's definitely been hit pretty hard since its It looks like it went on the market here in 2020. I would suggest to you that on the whole, that Unity was probably brought low to accumulate and not because it's not valuable. I really don't see it going away anytime soon. Is this kind of one of those things that's moderately in my wheelhouse? Like, I've used it for game animation. I've used it for online web animation. I don't see it just like disappearing. But that being said, you know, we're always trying to do technical setups on here and see what we can find. I'm gonna just kind of highlight the main levels and then we'll check it out. Do a little more detail. Recently, the Unity play got a lot more traction because Roaring Kitty had posted about it. And it's probably one of those things, you know. He likes to look for value plays that he thinks are overshorted and undervalued, and he's pretty good at picking them, you know. The last one he called out was Chewy, I think. Aside from GameStop. So that's one I remember. Let's see here. Okay. So this is one of those ones that I look at and I think about the overall movement here, right? You can see the underlying movement. I'll tell you what I think. I think this is in a multi-year. This is August 2024. I think this is one of those ones that probably is going to squeeze, but I think it's in a multi-year channel here that needs to be kind of reconciled. It reminds me a lot of MPW, like a lot, because it has like a very similar build out in that 2020 model on AMC where you have like a ledge drop. There's a few of them here, but this is specifically coming after this LSPY drop. You have kind of a double top that tries to advance, and then it backs way up, and it's advancing like pretty rapidly. But it hasn't made, at least not in my opinion, I don't think it's made that back up here, so I'm not seeing it. This could be it, I guess. It's always strange when you see it like crawl across like a caterpillar instead of it being like a clear jump and then back up. I find it to be a bit confusing. I would suggest this one though. I'm going to bring it out a bit. That one right there. So what I'm saying is that it hasn't made a higher high yet here. There's plenty of space to come down. And then it's got this U-shaped pattern with the RSI, which has a lot of symmetry to it. And I point that out because when you look at this as a double M, then it has a little more teeth to it, I think. As you see this as an M1, and then potentially, right, this is a middle, and then some kind of an M2 shape. The M2 shape typically is flat, but really it's a mirroring of sorts to what we see on this side. So the pattern is not particularly bizarre on RSI. It looks very simple. It's that pattern right there. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because this is meant to be like a liquidity, and I think you go backwards even further, you'd probably find that it's kind of scooping up along this previous wave as well. But what we usually see is that in the M, there's some kind of like a downward motion that is possible. So if I were looking at it and it were flat, let's just say completely flat, and you had this kind of motion here, right? If you were in this particular spot and you weren't sure about direction, You weren't 100% sure about direction, right? You would probably look in between the two and say, well, where is there any weaknesses or whatever? And more than likely, you're going to find some kind of a trend, and there's a lot of directional movement here that's kind of confusing. You got some here, and frankly, this is April. I mean, this could have been like a big part of the move already. It looks like it already went from 15 to 25, you know. So it already made like a huge dip, but there certainly was a lot of input going down. It started back here. I'm not necessarily suggesting it has to come all the way back down, but in a, because it did do this dip pretty low. But man, if it drops this creek, I think it's very possible. So if it drops this rising trend, I think it's very, very possible. I would be concerned in two zones if it does that. One is if it came here, I would watch it pretty carefully. This could be a type of a head and shoulders setup, maybe. Again, where it's winding back down, trying to get it low. Not sure. Could also be an LPS moment. Again, I'm kind of stretching it out here, but just looking at that next earnings. If it dropped below that, I mean, you could have something of the opposite effect, where that earnings really pushes it back down. It's rarely this simple. And I could see why that might be desirable if they can achieve it. And on the RSI, as that build out goes, I might see that as a, man, it really looks like there might be more room to go up here too. This is complicated again. I can't really tell with this space, but maybe a little more headroom. That moving average hasn't gotten overbought. But I would suggest to you there's some kind of a play here down as well that someone's trying to like manufacture. And I don't really know the answer to the question that I'm presenting, but I would suggest that it's somehow like in between these. Again, as you would expect, if it were sideways, you would expect there to be a potential to come back down. And usually it's going backwards towards, most typically it's going backwards towards this breakout as like a first stop, and then the second stop is like a 50-50 down. It's almost always like evenly spread. And in this case, these are pretty low, so I don't know. I don't think it's that complex. If you're going to trade it, I would probably just have a stop if it came beneath this for the time being, this trend. Keep it really simple and just not like trade it if it drops below there. And if it does, then I would just wait and see what happens. Because it may just be that it needed to back up and get to this bottom. And you could have some kind of a build out into July or August that really benefits it to the upside, depending on how that would go. And I'm not saying it has to go down. I'm just looking at it. But, you know, this could be really bullish. If it did something like this, you could have a really huge kind of a S-curve forming out. Because remember, like the first part of an S-curve is always an S-curve. And then the full S-curve is always got two individual ones, right? So the assumption might be that this is about to just take off and go. I can't answer the questions about short interest or, you know, options change stuff. If it's going to just go, it's just going to go. But what I can say is that normally in the bigger S-curve like this, which I think this probably is, potential anyways for one, I think you really just want to see it build out with strength, you know, across. So, and then you'd see another one right here. That's typically how it goes. So long term, certainly could see it come back to near 33. That looks like a ledge from here. That's in view. I don't think that's a bad play. And if you're comfortable just with shares, you might be okay with getting it now, but I'm trying to think if there would be any real reason to like not go up, to like, other than just, hey, we want to go back and try to get these shares down low again. Is there any reason to come back down rather? I'm not seeing any creek crosses that are not being met. I'm looking at all these and I'm like, yeah, they're all there. The only one I could tell at the moment seems to be this guy. That's it. And that's the halfway point one. So, yeah. What's hard to understand is when you look at this, then looking back and seeing this, and you're like, well, that's the same, pretty much the same exact spot. And I'm always thinking to myself, like, that's probably what is going to happen. Like, it's going to end up being pretty much the exact same spot on the opposite side, because this is basically like a consolidation across a middle, and then there's a widening going on. So, like, naturally, bears would try to take it this direction. Bulls try to take it this direction. I'm really just looking at this on RSI and suggesting that it seems to be favoring bears right now based on how elevated it is. But you'd have to wait it out anyways if there's a backup here. So, and then, yeah, longer term, probably a few different markers that we could use. But again, like typically the one I would use is actually already on the screen. It's this triangulation right here. And that is where it's triangulating. Where it's from this drop ledge, the high one, where after it lost the trend, here it was a really high up one right here. But then after it lost that, it goes low. This is kind of your middle. There's typically like a pretty decent or easy to find triangulation. So that one's reasonable, and then there's another one slightly lower that also looks reasonable, and it catches that bottom. And see how like that's like way farther out. This is February 2026. So the idea of it being a squeeze play may be actually very true if this ends up being a pivot. Because if it went down into August, and then it squeezes from 13 up to 33, it could be a two-parter, much like what we saw in AMC. That's not as far, but that's a big move, I think that's pretty reasonable, actually. That would be the case. And I suppose the only real argument is like, well, maybe that's already happening. Exactly my point. Like, I don't really know. Is this low enough? Maybe. This could be a phase B top. This could also just be setting up for a spring. And this is really the phase B bottom. I know it looks exactly like what's already drawn. I get that that's confusing. You're like, well, it's just a bigger version of that. I know. I'm aware. It's not exactly the ideal thing to see that, but I genuinely do think it's probably a lot of it has to do with the July 11th date, which seems to be the case across the board. There's a sort of a key like pivot marker around the 11th for almost all the stocks, which makes sense. I'm just seeing this as a strong possibility if it doesn't have a lot stronger move left in it, and it just looks like it's coming to the end. So these retracements can be really, really far. So this one's not that big compared to some other ones. Like back here, these were huge moves. Huge moves. Yeah, this is what it looks like too right here. I'm sorry, I missed this. So this is very similar right there. I don't know how I missed that at first, but I missed it. So there's a pattern similarity here for sure. Easy to miss. I'm just going to try to illustrate it, and I realize that's not really the best way to do it. So notice there would be a key difference, which is, of course, this sets up really high, like a lot of stuff. But there's this kind of double bottom low, right? Where you dip and then you go up and then you come back down. And that did happen here, and it was really small, okay? But you have this kind of a bottoming, comes up and comes back low. Now, it doesn't have any other lows, which is true. But this is the same thing. This doesn't have any other lows back here, you know. It's consistently making higher highs until this point. And so it develops like a strength of supports here, and then later has a dip beneath that support and comes up again. But notice that it didn't make a higher high. So like the highest motion goes from top to bottom here. That's the direction I'm trying to point you in, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The similarities are there. So this has the greatest move from top to bottom here. And you're seeing something similar. We've got two supports built, one here and one here. And I messed that up, but one here and one there. And that's the supports that are being built. And then the greatest move has already happened down. So this already had this kind of plunge. And this, again, this didn't make a lower low on the big picture. It did, however, drop through what we would call like an ice level here. So in much the same way, if this were to have a capitulation, there's probably a marker there. Like maybe right here. Maybe even higher up, because that looks like a multi-hit right here off that first area. And that's where your 50% would be coming back down. Just like this had the same marker, but it was really low. They had to build out right here. So when you come back, this ends up kind of fanning out more or less along that bottom. That is the halfway point. So the directional movement of that cross and where that ends up comes off this bottom right here. So I would be cautious because it doesn't have to go that low, but especially if it's stronger down here, you have more buy-in. It's not necessarily going to achieve what it's trying to do, but it did not make a higher high. So you really have to wait and see if there's going to be another buy-in here, maybe around like 22 down to $20. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. I personally couldn't make an argument that this couldn't go low again. I actually think this went really low last time. If I'm not mistaken, it went down to... Yeah, that was developed. So probably something similar would be this one that we already drew. It's low, but it's there. That's one possibility. This guy. And another possibility we've also kind of drawn already, which is this yellow one. But I think that white one is probably the most likely candidate. You see that little lip? That actually sets up the trajectory for like the rest of all of this, which is crazy to me. There's more to it than that. It goes back further, maybe a little bit. It probably goes back to here. This is like a big macro. Yeah, this is like a huge macro cat ear. Well, so maybe there's another one then from this guy. Or from this guy. I don't really want to move that line though. So instead I'll use something else. I don't know, that's super low. And it already kind of hit that one. So maybe that's already done. Yeah, I think it's possible that's already finished. But this is curious, this direction right there. I really think that's important. And it was hit here. See, this to me is like the fear, I suppose, of $6, which is super low. That would be a completely different kind of squeeze, right? If it came from 6 all the way up to 34, That's a huge move. 400%. So I'm going to suggest that Unity may have a really good buy-in, especially if it goes down just for a spring. This I'm not so sure about, but who knows? You never know. Really don't. This could be something kind of crazy, in the end. I don't think it'd be that low. I'm just saying there's a possibility. It is a trend. So it seems directed that way. But there's another one. This is what's curious on this. Is this guy has a very clear direction. Just keeps going the same direction. But this one is a little different. It had 2 hits already that were checked. I just marked it off. And then it actually seems like it may even have another right here, which is quite steep, or less steep, I should say, which is right there. So again, this kind of gives maybe light to why this is moving the way it's moving across these jumps and these backups. This may be a more likely hit though, as opposed to that tippy top. So maybe even like this guy. That looks better. Sorry, I got a really bad glare on my screen, so I keep drawing and redrawing. I would say so. That one looks actually really good too. So that could represent a more middle of the road approach, I suppose, like $10 or something ridiculous. Even if this came up to 33, I don't think you could just say it's definitely going to run. So the main problem with this whole chart is the downtrends. They've extended quite a few times, and you can see that this certainly works right there. I mean, it's right where it needs to be, but it's not a breakout. So there's an issue of yeah, I could get up there by August and be at $34, but then that's not breaking out. And then it leaves all these other doors open for, well, what if we just wanted to come back down now to 9? I mean, it's possible that goes up first. That would be breakdown. It would not be bullish. Anywho, I wouldn't go any further than that for now, though. I think it overcomplicates it. And I'm already kind of making it more complicated probably than it needs to be. So where it stands, it could find support right now and continue. I would not be surprised if it dropped back first to 21, and then you'd watch it and see if it builds back out above 24 maybe later on. It's a slower move, unfortunately. But yeah, it's possible. That's a continuous S-curve. And then this is also possible, I think. It almost doesn't matter. Because see, I wonder, this kind of stuff always makes me curious. Because yeah, that hits perfectly. It makes you think that's likely going to happen. But I wonder about this right here. Because everything else kind of lines up, but then this little marker doesn't, right? The first 2 markers line up, and they give you a consistent trend with what we're seeing on the top. But then this one goes beyond. And it always makes me wonder if that's actually going to be part of maybe the design here, is to check the high and the low of it. Now, I don't know how you could do that without having an existing trend. So maybe there is sort of a secondary motion, I don't know, to the top. But it does make me curious about the potential later to push up high. If we're checking here, maybe we're going to check there, It wouldn't be that unfounded. And based on where we think that is, it's actually kind of right around that middle here. It would make sense to some degree that those connect, and one goes below the range and the other goes above the range, I don't know that that's a real thing, but the more I stare at charts, the more I start seeing stuff like that. I'm like, I wonder if that's part of it, is a liquidity test on channels Then also, because that came low, this creates a different trend. And this is a very different one. You know, this does seem to ride pretty well with this guy. Doesn't ride as well with this. It rides a little bit better as a later breakout, you know, for Unity here. So I find that to be curious as well. Who knows? Yep. So today went from like really boring to kind of meh to kind of bad. So unfortunately, this chop, which again is like we're talking about diamond, this is really like the same thing. You have this widening that's happening, and then you're kind of narrowing in. This case, this isn't a particularly like wide range for a diamond structure, but you would probably suggest that that's the peak to the valley. And these are basic measurement tools, but you would take it to where the liquid center likely is in the breakout, and that's a good potential spot for a drop right there. That kind of hits the range, the 325 range. You can go even lower than that and use the hook value you could for AMC. It's just weak, at least for now. Volume's kind of low. That might be a saving grace in the end, but we'll see. It's not exactly something to write home about. It's just, okay, volume's kind of low on this sell-off. It's not really giving us a huge red bar yet. I don't see this as like wildly inconsistent, except that my timing hasn't worked out. But if this is like the end of an iterative motion going into about noon today at June, and that's like a pinnacle moment right here, I wonder if we're seeing kind of the outward workings of like an expansion. So it seems a little odd, right? Because I was saying like this looks like the bigger picture, and I do think that's still true. And to some degree, it might be that simple. I'm going to scoot it over. But what's curious about that is that if that's the case, then it could be very, very straightforward here. Because in some ways, think about it like this, right? If this were the same thing from an iteration standpoint, and you got a sell-off, and you got this kind of like shallow S-curve thing here, and it bounced to like a slightly new low, and it doesn't look very shallow. It looks almost like a full S-curve, right, at that point. But the point is like if it were to drop down, let's say it barely makes a new low on the bigger picture. It really doesn't make a huge difference, though. It doesn't really. But let's say it drops down and makes a low there. That particular setup is still very, very similar to what we see on the big picture with this like drop in and this kind of bracketing out of cat ears within a potential drop low. Like it's essentially the same thing. So we're seeing a marked behavior pattern that's still going the same direction. Like it's still doing the same thing it was doing before. I'm not seeing any change of character yet. The only thing I mentioned this morning was this guy. But honestly, it may not mean a whole lot. It's just a small 1 hour wick or something. So, you know, is it possible that this still has life in it? Absolutely. But I've not yet seen any kind of change. So thus far, it's just been kind of pushing downward and doing the same thing. The pattern looks the same. It just hasn't changed direction yet. It might seem a little bit reactive to some to do it that way. But remember, like, if it is iterative and it does end up being a bit more shallow than perhaps bears expect, then we're really talking about a shrinking downward, an iteration that's shrinking downward. Like they're trying to do the same thing they did here and just drive it a little bit lower. Now that can accelerate to a point of like breakneck speed at some point if it goes parabolic down. That has happened before. But it also, when it reverses, typically is very strong because if the reversal pattern on the small scale, let's say this dropped a little bit more, if the reversal pattern on the small scale is like a bounce that goes higher here and then finds support, then the next level up tends to be the same. You get that bounce that goes higher here and then finds support. And so that plays out to our benefit if it does that. Aside from timing today, which clearly is off, and I don't know exactly what to say other than, well, maybe it's going to go down, right? If the timing is as it is, we think that this might be the case. This looks way longer than AMC. AMC's really looked like it was done by Thursday. This one has a lot more length to it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't like that. Let me see where this middle is. See, I don't know. This middle's kind of about more where I expected it to be. It's a lot sooner. All right, maybe. And that being kind of the lowest. Yeah, still wouldn't have ended by tomorrow morning. And I'm not necessarily perfect here. I'm just kind of looking at the, this is like an S curve. So it terminated at this end. I find that to be helpful. To potentially call where the middle is, which is kind of tricky because this is bizarre looking. Yeah, and then you can see on these parallels it lost it again. It's dipping below that, so it's struggling to kind of hold it as a potential support. It's just not holding up. So take it further back, see where it could go. We already did the shoulder marker. It seemed like 27 was the marker that it might hit. This is another one right here. This is actually pretty good. This guy. This runs really far. This goes all the way back to March. And then beyond that, you're looking at some pretty serious capitulation, I think. Like, more serious drop. Like way low. What about from top to top here? Yeah, that's the right marker. So that's currently being used like a trend. So frankly, I guess our expectations have been a little bit maybe too bullish if this didn't have a reversal. So that still looks pretty low. That falls in line with this, so I mean that's solid. I know I've got a couple different paths here that have slightly different lengths. That one's really, really fast. There's another one that was slightly slower. I use that because that actually has a clearer cross for me. It goes through the middle. And it doesn't end. It's one of two things, right? It either ends on a higher note here, and then that's the rest of that's the drop. So that would be like this extension. But it'd be like right there. Since this technically goes through the opposite side, that's a possibility. But I'd still have to then, I'd have to actually pull this back to here then if I did that. So I should probably be careful about that because I didn't do that. It would be like this, which is kind of different. Anyways, that's a possibility that it sort of stops there and then has like a quick drop Thursday. I still think it could be that shallow motion though. doesn't take much here to reverse this, I'm telling you. You're like, yeah, I know you've been telling us all day, but it hasn't happened. I know, but if bulls at some point change this and go the other direction, it's going to be pretty fast. Like, it's going to be rapid fire. It really is. And if not, then we already know what's expected. It's not a big deal. I'm doubtful it happens right here, right now, but the gap is right there. So that follows. The biggest problem here is the, I suppose, and maybe it's a Friday move, it starts off like a Friday move, but the biggest problem I would suppose is actually the, this bit. Because this offers you a glimpse into a further drop that probably comes down and tests this trend, which I said was probably our more important of the few that we have, was this guy. It's not my favorite, but it's a decent one. It's not my favorite because it doesn't go through all the tops very well, but it does have a really clean hit here, here, and here. I feel like it's a good one for that reason. So that would be a possibility for Friday. So we can get our double reversal. You know what? It might very well be the case that you get something like that. Nobody knows what you're talking about, Bugsy. I'm just talking. 64 degrees. Let me check the angle here. 55. 44. 64 is right there. It's very steep. I'm going to flip the chart. Hold on. I still don't think this looks bad. I mean, I know it feels bad, but I really don't think it looks that bad. They left a gap here, and I think it's just really an odd place to do that. I really do. Like, it's going up towards this top, but all of these would have to be met, and then it'd also have to break here in order to become truly bearish. So it's just very strange to me that they would have left all that open. And then even further than that, I think it has to come above this top, which is another one that would cause a problem. And it's a bottom, but it's like all of that combined makes me wonder that if this is actually going to, do that. I just don't feel like it's going to. That's later. That's in July on the 11th. It still just looks like a cat ear to me. This is problematic. Like, it definitely looks like a, quote unquote buy-in on the part of bears. Man, GME is a tough one. Some of these things, they set up really neatly, and then others just didn't. And I guess that's just life, but life lesson. Some of these set up very, very clean, like they were going to go a certain direction, and then others just did not. It seems like almost everything right here is hinging off of this July 11th marker still, which we found before, and I don't feel that's changed that much. Yeah, I mean, if you sneeze the other way, it's going to potentially have some pretty massive moves. That's what I'm trying to suggest. I really do think that's true. Where would that be going? 1, 2. There's something about GME's chart that just, I don't know. Can't quite put my finger on it. Like I always feel like I'm missing something. 1, 2. Well, I wonder, this is like a double up. This is like a double up. I wonder if that's a, it could be an iterative motion. Here, up, here, up. Of course, it's backwards, because then this dropped and this goes up. But it is backwards. I think wave, wave jump, wave back up. I probably do a lot of the same thing over and over again, and I don't mean to be boring and use the same techniques over and over again, but I'm trying my best to understand direction. I feel like that's where they tried to get support, and it looks like they were pretty successful. Doesn't really align with this top. I don't know. Yeah, it does. So this is like a fake out. Right. This is what I'm saying, guys. You see this right here? You see how this jumps up and over? And then when it will, like, what I'm saying is like, you see how this comes up and it like has this double top motion, right? And it looks like it's going to be bullish because we're in upside down land right now. It looks like it's going to be bullish. But then instead of being bullish, it actually rejects and goes the other way. So this looks like a bearish kind of a break, at least at first. Now, this didn't make any higher highs, so there's some clear differences. But if we flip the chart back around, that motion still looks bad. Like it still looks like it came back beneath that creek right here. It looks like it's dumping, you know. That's a very obvious kind of bear trap looking backwards, because bears would have thought that this actually broke down. I mean, it actually closed beneath the, not only beneath the ice, but beneath that creek. So it's just like a really bad turnaround. It didn't make a new low, which is something to be said, but still, it has that push up. There's the double cat ear, and then it drops. We're seeing kind of a similar pattern here, but much, much larger and more downward, where you've got this this double top motion here. This is the consolidation, and then that's the push up. Really, I know that I talk about iteration quite a bit, but I'm trying to like illustrate why I think this is the case if it does reverse, because it has a very similar build out. I didn't make a lower low, you know, on the bigger picture here. I think it makes a higher low right there. Let me double check, because I don't want to say that. Yeah, no, it made a higher low. This is it's glare, man. Turn off this light. 29.23. That's 29.20. So yeah, it makes a higher low. It does have a little bit of a weakness, I guess, on the second drop here, but it never, to me, it's like not broken. So it didn't come all the way up above. There's some issues with it, but it's not broken. It looks okay. So what I'm suggesting is that motion right there has like the fake out breakout, right? So if you look at the creek motion, it clearly like drove up and then went back through both. And we have some issues again where I'd have to kind of look at this helicopter and say, well, it's not really the same because this is so high in a way. So you have to kind of figure out, a better way to maybe interpret it. But I think you've got a similar pattern. The biggest change, I would suppose, is that it didn't come over this top aggressively. Yeah, it didn't really try to breach that top at all, so not sure. Anyways, my point was, notice what happens when this reverses and it goes backwards. So once it kind of reaches the target, there's this gap up. As soon as it comes above here, it comes back above that rising ice here. It's basically just back on track to bust out. There's this pretty evident SOS intersection right there. And it just breaks out and goes, and then it flies, right? It's a hard reversal because it's a bear trap first. That's kind of the way I feel about this right now. I know it's not identical, but if it ended up having this sort of push back up, it's going to go pretty far, pretty fast. I don't think it's going to go up necessarily to this top at first, but I think you could look at this as a similar level right here off of this top. That's debatable. We'd have to kind of parse it out. But that's the motion, man. If it did something like that, I think you'd be in like a pretty massive upward motion. Fairly rapidly. It's probably a better way to look at this is look at this as a left and right and then look at a left and right. But I didn't do that, so I have to do that some other time. That'd be like left, right, bigger left, right versus just the small stuff. Small stuff is not, it's small, so maybe not the best example. But anyways, I digress. Market's about to close. I'm going to see if I can finish this thought. Yeah. It's trying. I mean, this is a little different because these didn't hold. I don't look like they held their weight. No, this was Tuesday into Wednesday. Into Thursday. So this did hold below there. That might be what's in view here, is just trying to keep it below until next week. That still looks like it could be the right one. This is, both of these seem pretty good for different reasons. And I wonder if long term, where's that gap? Right there. Don't need that. Just kind of throws a wrench into it, I guess. Just a bit. Where is this going? Why do I have this way over here? I was like, where is this going? This is like some random line. Let's just use the snap tool. Just snap it. Yeah, so this is heading for this gap. Well, like I'm saying, I think if it goes back through here, it's going to be ridiculously bullish. So it's a lot like this motion here, perhaps, maybe as a comparison. It's a little different because it kind of, on bigger picture, it compares more to this. And then even still, you have to then think about, like, well, what else could happen? Because there's a lot that could happen here that's not exactly exciting. And we talked through some of that before, of the possibility this is kind of boring even going into July. That's not impossible. But a reversal here would definitely take the market by storm. That's divergent on the hourly, I think. Let's take a look. May not be much. All right, this double bottomed on 28.43. RSI on the hourly is slightly higher. So there's a very, very, very small time frame divergence. Not much to suggest there other than it's just there. It's possible it could be a bottom, but it'd be kind of weird to leave the gap again, wouldn't it? I think if this reverses, you're going to have one and then two. I don't think it's going to look like this. Probably going to have it go... I have to come all the way back above 31 though. Like that. And then... yeah, that's the backup. And then it just runs. That's really far. That's where I would place it. I'm not thinking that level's that different. I'm just going to get it off the chart for now. And then timing, it's the same idea timing-wise. You probably have the similar spot, like the end result being right around Monday, not Friday here. It's a hard one because there's just so many possibilities in this. Oh wow, that's a big drop after hours. What's going on? Whoa, it's way down here. It just wicked down to 26.52. What the heck? I mean, that's where we thought it might go. It's going back like it's going to go check that, but that's low. What a nasty test to do in extended hours. I went to 26.22 all of a sudden. It may end up doing something else, but so this doesn't actually register as a good backup if it does go that low. The only thing I can think, if it did this tomorrow, oh, it's going lower. Geez, at 25.60? What? It's going off the wall now. Give me a break. OKLO offering. Oh, that was the one I was in, but I got out of it. Isn't it? I was saying it wasn't a good hold after this top. So I traded it already. A proposed private offering of 1.75 billion of convertible senior notes. So what do we make of that? This is kind of the last thing that I wanted to have happen. They did it at the same level. That can't be a coincidence. This is exactly what happened last time. It's the same level. That doesn't even make sense to me. Somebody knew. There wasn't anything private about that. Somebody had to have known that that was going to happen right there. This is like a repeat of last time. Somebody's using a saw, I think. Well, how do you chart for that? You don't. I did not want this to go through 26, 25 area. So I don't know what to do about that. How would you have known? I don't know. I mean, we were doing TA on it all day. Obviously, there were things here that you were looking at. We were just talking about it. You know, it could come down pretty low. Maybe 26, maybe 20, even as low as 25. But it can't go below that, you know. It can't keep dropping off the face of the earth. And now we've got a similar problem. This last time it did this, it dropped below that ice. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't personally like the idea of it going below there again. So even if it's a good money-making opportunity for GameStop, this is not where you want it to be right now. You don't want it to be down here at 24.50. Let me see. It's like 24.30. Well, then again, 24 to 24.50 is that long-term support level, so it may not be the end of the world. I mean, granted, last time it did run quite a bit after, but I feel like that was part of this overall setup. I'm not really sure I see that same setup right now. It went down to like 24.50. It could run up to 42, I guess. That's still the target area. Oh, boy. But it certainly wasn't expected. All right. So if it were to do exactly the same thing, which I'm not saying it will, there is a potential there, I suppose. Yeah, we were talking about that deep red and that possibility. Somebody must have known. Somebody always knows. I don't know why I'm even saying somebody must have known. Somebody always knows, right? That's the way the saying goes. Somebody must have known he was going to do another offering up there, because they brought it to the exact same price, which I don't even know why we didn't notice that, but it was brought down to the same exact price basically last time it was there. It's going to do the same thing. Gap way down and dive. Arguably it's weaker because this is higher up and it just made a top that went above the top. You can't just drive through creeks. The technical person in me, the TA person in me, does not like it. You really shouldn't be driving up and then back down through creeks that you just spent months crossing. Not a good thing. I'm going to give it the most extreme that I can, which I think is right off of this middle right here. That's the most extreme I can give it. That's the low. That would be the lowest I could see that going for the time being. I don't know. There's a lot of downside possible from there, so I mean, assuming that this is like an upthrust, these two, and that this was like a backup that was ultimately like a spring action on this, like a secondary motion over the top of this creek. This could be a backup that you go to, but it's already like significantly lower. if it drops that low. It's like beneath that bottom, or at least double bottoming there. As an M cross, it's not impossible, but this is typically where you see failings, right? Remember, we had this idea, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but this idea of this as a cat ear. And originally, there was a sense in which this is probably going to be like a top mechanism. So if you look at this as like a quadruple top kind of mechanism, like cat ear, like this would be like the middle of it, right? It's not inconceivable that it could have like a double bottom off of something like that, but it would be pretty unusual. I don't know if I could use I just don't know what I would do to kind of justify it other than just kind of fudge the lines to make them work. On the grand scheme of things, you come back to 2450, which is a similar drop. It's not exactly the worst place to be. I mean, this is a potential for support. Last time when it dropped, it went way below that. So if it held at 2450 and it bounced out and kind of held its own right there in that region, even though that's below where I would feel very uncomfortable there, even though that's below the comfort zone and it's not a good place to be from a technical standpoint after making that top, because you dropped the creek, which is not positive. That's typically a negative thing. I think it's possible that could still act as a pretty strong support. We mentioned this before because every time there was an earnings, it for the last few years, more often than not, it was going back to this 24 realm. This seems to be the point of consolidation, but it doesn't take a lot to just kind of look at this and see what I'm talking about with a cat ear here. Like, I think there's a very simple visual, you know what I mean? Like, this is not that complicated. So normally, like if I were looking at this and I saw that drop, I would not be happy with that. After going through it the first time, to have this up thrust go higher than the previous and then drop below, it does look extremely bearish. That's all there is to it. If it were any other stock in the market, and I know it's not just any other stock, but if it were any other stock in the market and they made a move like that, that's the way I would interpret it, would be a bearish move. And this is very backwards because we had done a lot of different ideas on GameStop, but if this dropped twice, again, I would be not thrilled. So that to me, again, reads more as a weakness here. And if that's a sign of weakness on this trend and the cat ear comes over the top, which it did, I already talked about this, it's okay that it makes that advancement. You can't just drop through there, This is kind of like the simplest way to understand this. It's like, yeah, there's a possibility this isn't completely broken. But you have to just kind of take it for what it is. If it comes through this crux here, 25 to 26, you're going to be in not good company. So even though, yeah, like 2450 is kind of that key level here, and even down to like 21 even, I don't think you want to go below here. It needs to stay right there. It just does. I don't get it, man. Like, why in the world, if you're sitting on that much cash, he's got to be looking to do an acquisition or something. I don't know. Why else would you have that much cash on hand? You share buyback? I don't know. Well, but even that wouldn't make sense here. So look, I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. Normally this would be cat ear 1, cat ear 2. I would not look at this favorably if it dropped below there again. And we'd be in a situation where we're basically stuck. That looks distributive as a result. If it goes below. So an alternative is that this is indeed already in a drop zone. It holds. So it doesn't go below maybe the bottom here. It goes down, but it doesn't go below it. And then this goes back up. It's still like whack. Doesn't make any sense. I don't like the Bitcoin strategy personally. I think it's kind of a weaker strategy. But I just think that that's not a business. Like, that's not changing your business model. It's just investment. There's a different way to interpret it than just, oh, cash is king, kind of. We're going to get so much money from this or whatever. I think you got to be a little bit careful with that kind of stuff. Well, upside down land looks okay. Doesn't look terrible. I wonder if this is some kind of like long-standing wave direction. Well, it might be. It might be that line I usually draw. Yeah, maybe. One of them. It's not the one I usually draw, but it is there. This is a cat ear breakdown here. So there's directional input there. It's kind of curious. So that probably is evident here as well. It is right there. It's not the one I normally look at. But right here. How do you divide this into pieces? Yeah, I'm going to be done with calls as well. I got some because I was thinking it was going to be a shallow S-curve. It is what it is. I knew there was bearish sign there when we talked about it. Bear sign. Bunch of bear turds everywhere. Smelled of blueberries and gasoline. Methane. But yeah, there was a lot of signal there for potential bear zone interaction. but I didn't heed that regardless. Oh well. It's not quite where I would expect it to be, but it is there. This one. That's a weird spot, isn't it? That teeny little guy right here. What a bizarre little marker. I guess that's coming off the bottom, so that's where it finally like dropped the bottom here. Still very odd. No, that does make sense. I've told you before, I'm not happy about it, but I've told you before, I think $4 and $6, $4.50 and $6 come up quite a bit in this TA. It is obnoxious. I don't necessarily think it gets there, but there's a lot of TA that supports it on the bear side. So here's what I think we're experiencing to a degree. Yeah, that's probably the jump. And this is probably that top. It is. So this is why it didn't advance here. It's a common sell down. So the question would be, is there a, we call it like a silver lining to this? I don't think there is immediately. Unless you get some kind of massive squeeze momentum into July and August, which probably will happen. It, to me, seems like we're back to the 17 idea again. It's not what I really wanted to see coming out of earnings. What are you going to do? Oh, well. Yeah, there's the middle. We were right on the money there. I mean, I've done this before. I'm just trying to clarify the movement. Sometimes I just kind of miss it, you know, miss the big picture. So that's the second middle. There's probably a third middle right here. I think we're dividing it into quarters as we go. So there's compression. Yeah, this does give you enough evidence to suggest, 40. I don't think beyond that, I'm not really sure. We'd have to look at some other outstanding creeks, but it only if it made this cross up, and it did. So that's why I was like, not really. I'm kind of confused because it made the jump up over, even though this advanced and it could be distributive. It hadn't come back below the creek, so it's like you don't have any real reason to fret about it. So this is a very odd time to have an offering that probably drops you beneath it, I mean, it's very likely this could drop you down beneath it. So it's like not a good time to have an offering like that, because even if, from a technical standpoint, because even if it is an offering that you think is going to yield some big result, now you're stuck waiting for the end action, right? The end result action. And I don't know, last time it came down, basically double bottom, so maybe it's possible tomorrow it stays at 25.70. I'm going to leave it like this for now, and that's a possibility. But the thing is like we were talking about this on AMC, this concept of striking through would have to be met with a different kind of reaction. So now I don't know where that is. Like, I have no idea. It almost doesn't make sense because it's going to be way off. Like way off kilter. Ah, this is not what I wanted to be doing tonight. Nah, it's below that. It's already dropped it, so I guess we'll see how it opens up. Ugly. Yes and no. I mean, the last offering was made at the peak. This was made like halfway. It's possible that somebody already knew that this was likely going to happen. And it was also made, I may have mentioned it a minute ago, it was made at the exact same level. I mean, it's essentially the exact same closing value, which is strange. Again, this could have been an opportunity for a bottom right here, you know, or a dip with a rip above. It's such a simple, like, you know, like it's such a simple reversal pattern if it goes the other way, because it was such a, again, it was very straightforward. Like this was a previous level of resistance. It acted as support here. You could have a dip to fill the gap, but ultimately you didn't want it to really drop low. And then that becomes like a new support. And look at how long this has been acting as a resistance. You get that as a support, you're going to get a push up. Instead, we're now gapping down below it. Say whatever you want to say about long term. Maybe it'll change tomorrow. You know, we don't know. The chart, I mean, but this is not really where you want that sell off. Again, I understand the idea of it being above 24 and how it's been acting as a really strong support. I also think it acts like a lot like a resistance too. I mean, historically, it's actually been selling off from this 24 to 26 area more than it's been acting as support. So I'm not sure if Cohen knows that that's like an important level, and his people are saying anytime it gets above there and stays above there for a while, we're going to sell. Is that most of those offerings happen right here. So if you remember the other two offerings, there's been like three actually. There's one here and then one here and here, I think, or maybe it was here and here. I can't remember. But those two both happened in like the same zone. You know, you look backwards and you're like, yeah, this is pretty much the same spots that we had back here when I think those were the first two. I'd have to double check the dates if I recall them. I don't have them off the top of my head, but it's basically the same thing over and over again. So some of you guys who are real smart will probably figure out why that is beyond just the fact that it's the same area. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's not a good thing though. So you just keep selling off. You keep doing offerings right when it hits that level. I don't get it. Are you trying to create like a new floor for whoever does these offerings, you know? Really bolster it again? Because right now, the consolidation isn't looking too hot. From my point of view, it's looking like, well, you've got a pretty bad potential here that you're going to run through the, I mean, what else is there to say? You got some seriously crappy potential here that you might just run through that bottom. And that potentially capitulates here. There may be a little more nuance to it, but that's probably where I have to leave it for now. cat ears are weird. They don't always end up in the right directional order. This to me looked like it flipped from bullish to bearish to bullish, not just because of down, but because of where it went, because it made new lows, and that's not good. And it ultimately already had this dip. This could have acted as a spring that jumps over the creek. So we're not done yet. Tomorrow is a new day. We'll see what happens. It's sitting right there. I don't find that to be in the least bit accidental that it's sitting like right there, you know, right on that previous lip. So it's a very important level for GME. And I don't see very, very easily going below that and just being like, okay, we're fine, right? Some people are going to look at that and say, well, it's just like this, and if it drops low, it'll hit the bottom and go, and maybe. But there's also nothing to suggest it couldn't do something like this going into August, and, you know, there's just so many possibilities. I hate that. It really bothers me. I'll come to terms with it and see if I can figure out something better to give you. If it drops low, I'd be really cautious about 26 for now. This is typically how it goes down into a distributive action, because it would hit the top and like a head fake, and then it would go the other way. And I've been worried about that for a while. It's just so big that everything's taking forever. Like if we were looking at this on a small scale and it did something like that, I'd be a little bit quicker to point it out. Like usually it's something like this, right? And there's some kind of weakness already in it. And if this were happening on a small scale, it's very easy to see it because it happens quick. Even within a couple days, you've got the answer. But you see something like that. And it almost always comes above this top and or this top, usually both. That's usually the most typical one. And that looks very similar to what we see here. And that's exactly the pattern that I usually see in a distribution. The reason that I was feeling optimistic is because you don't have to, this could be an SOS where you back up and you don't have to drop, you know. It's not a one size fits all equation. There's always the possibility of the return back up because you can create like a double M, which is what was happening here. You got this like one and then they push up again over. I thought that was really interesting. You know, even though this has a weakness in it, potentially, that's the bear directive. So I don't know if they were just like resigned to it. Maybe that's part of this in the end. Who knows? And they were just like, it's going to go down, so let's just go ahead and get the offering while it's high. I don't know. I just don't know what would cause you to... Whatever. Yeah, this creek is all kinds of whack. I don't know how to draw it at this point. It should be there. That's where it should have been. Like, it should have been high. But I wonder if you retrace it back, it's like really, really low. Yeah, you can't lose this level right here. So this is set up in a way that triangle is building right on top of that support. So continually dipping beneath there is not a good idea unless you're just going for liquidity grabs. But even that, it's like at some point, if you drop below it, you're going to just drop. There's not going to be a return. Go all the way back to like 15. Way down here. Not what I expected for GME. It's very close to what I expected for AMC. You know, if something like that were to happen, pretty similar to AMC. Not what I expected for GME. This was the path that leads to a massive kind of a like a widening, essentially. It gets kind of crazy later. It probably still come up again in August, by the way. I don't think that's necessarily off the table. By the way, I'm just saying that's what I would expect. So, yep, and there would be there. Probably the same level we're sitting at right now from this 2850. It's probably where that middle would end up being, or that buy-in, just like back here. Is it have to be way up there? It has to be really high up. If it's going to do any kind of squeeze motion. Say la vie. Not what I was expecting. Look, if it holds above this marker right here and it doesn't go below it, I don't think it's bearish. So I know I'm drawing a lot of bear side stuff right now. I'm trying to see if the offering breaks it below. I don't really care what happened last time. All right, because what happened last time, although yeah, it ends up being like a spring buy-in. I get that. Don't get me wrong. You can't. That's no guarantee that it's going to do it again, and it already broke through this ice before. So I'm very concerned that it does it again. You're going to end up with a capitulation, which is typically what happens if you've already made the weakness and then you go up and you distribute off the top and then break both a downward creek and an upward drive. This is not, for me, you can do mental gymnastics to try to like make it work, and it can work. It's very simple to me. Like, that's the crux. And if it drops below that, I can't really suggest that it's going to come back above. Even if it did in the end, I wouldn't be able to say that with any kind of assurity at all. I could say it remains bullish if it held this level here and it was strong on this bottom. That's called stopping power. Yeah. But I can't say that with any kind of surety at all if it comes below. And I would have to be that way. There's nothing else to be said, right? You know, and this is not a guarantee that it goes super, super low. I'm just looking at where that creek is. It's really low. I mean, it's super low, so that's where it is. That's very, very low. There's also the possibility, and I put it on the chart for this reason, there's always a possibility that it just hits a bottom, period, you know? That could be as simple as like 20 bucks, you know, something like that. So, yeah, you just got issues right here. That's what I'm trying to say. Underneath this pocket, there's a lot of problems that come up. I promise I wouldn't just say that if I didn't think that was the case. I just didn't think it was going to be like AMC, you know? I should have known better with this, that something was off. It just shouldn't come up that high and then go that far back, but it was looking at that retracement like, man, it could happen, you know? I don't think it's actually really not that complicated at all. Because what we're really saying is that this is essentially like a similar build out here. And I know maybe goes without saying it, even that, but if you look at this as a compression and this is a sideways action across a middle, this sideways action coming down and this sideways action coming down, this is coming down through this middle realm, right, in this big walk down. This is the same or similar action here. And if you lose that middle, then you're going to come down to the bottom again, right? And the bottom is way over here. So is there a chance that it doesn't go that low? Sure. When I flip the chart upside down, I can see the possibility, because there's like we just talked about it. Like that doesn't just magically go away, because there's clearly like evidence that this could be just like a spring action. And in the upside down areas, it looked like it could have been an up thrust. I would have looked at it as potentially like this is actually the support, and it's hitting the support on the trend right here from back here. This is more of like that dip, right? And we're trying to get back to that support, not so much we're trying to get back down to ultimately the bottom. So that's why I was suggesting it's possible that we don't actually go as low as we're expecting to go. Maybe GME is a bit stronger and it holds above the support here, maybe even double bottoms. I don't think that's impossible, right? First time we came down to 20 and consolidated, we weren't anywhere near it. Second time we came down to 20, around 2092, we're on the next level down, which is kind of the halfway mark. If we did it again and we went all the way down to 20 this time, and even if we went in like the next month, right, by July 11th, which is quite the opposite of what our expectations were, even if we went down just by that point, you'd be on that marker. You'd be there. That doesn't really make me feel good. You know, you can see the pattern of up thrust here that could happen, and it would be much the same, you know, on this walk down. This kind of motion right there isn't out of the question, but I suppose you could maybe say, well, I don't think it's going to, you know, do this or do that. I also think that based on where this is, it's not exactly bearish long term. If you look at where that is, that's that $15 level right here. So if it were to do it again, but from a higher place, and kind of walk across this dude in a similar way, and it's not exactly the same anyways, it's already doing it like higher up. So in some ways it already looks better, right? But if you had a similar price action here, I don't even know what that would look like. It'd have to be like that. It'd be really weird. You could have something similar, perhaps. This is more in line with what I thought would happen with AMC, though, not what I thought was going to happen with GME. But sure, that puts you on top of that marker, not below it. And that's basically where the breakout was, the throwback. And then the 17 marker, which I know other people have called out, and I've said that I generally agree that that's probably where it goes if it does go down. That region, there's nothing wrong with that call out. People that have said 17, I think they're probably right. That's a possibility. Makes sense to me. It's a good number. And it's similar to AMC having that really nasty downward creek. This creek is a lot flatter, and it would be right about there. This is a fairly comparable setup as well. I mean, you can look at the motion here and the motion here. It's not exactly like way off from top to bottom. That actually fits quite nicely with this being a spring-like extension in reverse to get you back down to 17. So half a dozen or more possibilities. Don't make you feel good, but it is what it is. I'm not the one that sold money into the market again. I think there was some writing on the wall, and now we're going to have to wait and see. But I would believe that obviously, if it's not clear, this is not going to be a shallow S curve. Thanks, Booksy. Well, who knows? So we're on a daily time frame. That's the daily 180 right there. Another way to look at it would be we're checking the daily 180. Maybe it holds. Another way to look at it would be a flip around the daily 180. This was close to a flip right here around the daily 180. That would be, again, pretty far by comparison to what was expected. Maybe going down as low as like 1950 if you just wanted to see it flip. And that could be a spring, blah, 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 blah. You can keep going. That line of thinking, all of it depends on what happens in the middle. So we'll really just got to wait until tomorrow, maybe the next day, and see what happens. But I can't, in good conscience, be immediately bullish if it drops below here. I think you could have some pretty positive reactions, you know, strong auto reaction kind of things. But we'd have to see that cross back up the creek. It lost it and the ice. Oh yeah, and it was right on the that's what I was saying. It's like right on the exact same marker as the last offering. Somebody must have known that that was coming. Meaning like your operator must have had an idea of what he's doing. I don't know. And this is, again, similar area as the last offering, so very odd. Man. Irks me. This really irritates me. It's going to take some time. I'm going to have to like reconcile this with the previous charts and see if I'm like overthinking something or underthinking something. There's a lot here, so I know it's hard. It's a hard game.
I died again.
Bummer. $25.73. Why? $25.73. Take a break.
Can't.
You can hit pause. $5.67. It's kind of the lowest it went there. Well, I mean, you can die in a car accident or you can die with 1,000 cuts. I understand the idea that it's going to go bankrupt might be gone. And in principle, having money is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But if your business model is still stuck in the past, which largely shorts think it is, then raising capital or doing Bitcoin investments doesn't actually change the business model. So I understand where people are coming from when they say the short thesis is dead. I don't necessarily think that's the case. Like, just because it's better is it's obviously better and it's good. Don't get me wrong. Doesn't mean that the problems that were there in the beginning have been fixed. They have not really been fixed. They've become more profitable by closing more brick and mortar stores, trying to do a little bit more of an online presence, and really leaning into collectibles. But this idea of them like investing in Bitcoin or raising capital doesn't change the underlying business and their bottom lines. EPS was good, earnings was a bit of a miss on revenue, and they regularly miss on revenue. Maybe this is going to change some people's minds about it. I'm doubtful that it will. Okay, well, I understand where you're coming from, but not everybody trades this the same way. So, well, that's the thing. But he's not announced any kind of transformational purchases. There's nothing that we've seen that's really indicated that this is somehow changing it. That's what we're waiting to hear. Right? What are you going to do with all this money? Because investing in Bitcoin is not a business model for a game company. Like, it's not that complicated. You might love that decision, you might hate that decision, but it's ultimately it is what it is. It's not changing your business model. It's not. So his investment there is one thing, but investing in that, investing in treasuries, whatever, that doesn't change the business. So you have to see that news. Maybe I'm missing something, but I've not seen it. Am I missing something? Like, I'm not seeing it. So I would love if tomorrow, if they have something that he actually announces, what are you doing with all this cash? Or are you just going to sit on it, and just sit on it, but not change the business? People need to see transformation or acquisition. I don't see that happening just yet. So I would love for it to happen. And it probably will if the guy knows what he's doing. I think he does. So this is not me being like bearish for the sake of being bearish, that's silly. It's really me looking at this like as a chart, I don't want to drop beneath this level. That's it. Then I'm like in a kind of a rough situation. I have to sort of redo the thought process here because it's a bad place to be. And yes, if you bought options, you got steamrolled here. That's not cool. But technically, if you bought shares at 30, you'd still be losing money, It's just unrealized loss, potentially. I don't know. This is way beyond the technical breakdown levels, too, that we talked about earlier. Those were much more mild to like 27, not to 25 something. So that's fine. Diversification's fine. There's nothing wrong with diversifying, but you gotta see like what the yield is gonna be. The market can't price in like what it doesn't know. And if there really is nobody that knows, then you're really just running on what you have on the balance sheet right now. And for me, I'm just trading it like technically speaking, I'm like, yeah, this is a bit of a mess because of all these offerings, and I'm conceding that. But from a technical standpoint, it's not exactly a home run. There's a lot of problems here, and I've been talking about them for the last year or so. That there's issues, right? There's some pretty major issues here with this setup that I don't really like. So I've been talking about the technical side for a while on GameStop, and there's just a lot of weird problems. Um, that's a big one right there. I'm not convinced we don't come back all the way down at this point. This seems more likely to me. And again, this is like a macro kind of shallow S curve where it has this drop. It doesn't go all the way down, but yeah, there's a lot of issues here. I wonder if this is going to do some kind of a massive long-term bottom. Yeah, I wonder. The problems that I've run into lately is when we do these from a helicopter iterative perspective, if it drops certain things, it ends up being a really long-term, potentially a really long-term build out, as opposed to like a quick move that largely was being, I think, anticipated. I mean, even me talking about February of next year, and I've been talking about February 2026 for a while. Even me talking about that, it's like, even that runs a risk of maybe oversimplifying something that could be much more long-winded. Um, it may not be that simple, you know. So one of the things that gets me is that pattern that we see, and I do it too much, I know, but that pattern we see on AMC, and this on AMC has looked kind of so-so, but we talked about this, and that was my expectation, that we were doing the cat ears long term right now, right? And that on GME it's largely held up much differently. Like you have a much stronger cat ear setup. So the first one's high, the second one's pretty high, right? But neither of those gives you any kind of guarantee that you don't come low again. This one has much more of a higher chance of turning into a, and this one's like super low for AMC. It's like that. This one's got a much greater chance of turning into an LPS as opposed to a spring, right? But I have seen it do this high rise and then still drop really low. So this to me looks kind of correct, like coming down to like 17 to 15. And that's why when we talked about it previously, I was like, yeah, that's sort of the target in mind. I wouldn't expect it to go lower at this point. This is kind of unreasonably low, like way down here. Probably end up being right around this level there, or this level there, like top or bottom there. Probably this one. That's not unreasonable. That can give you like a local spring in this range, dropping back below these levels, and then having like a really big rip by retracing back down to a floor that you jumped above. And that's a very strong, very, very strong, big picture wise. This is a hugely powerful it hits that low and comes up above. I saw this, the first time I recognized this pattern was probably when we were in March, that build out in 2022, which was 3 years ago, long time ago now. And then I saw it again, and when I saw it again, it was the only time I've really seen it before the August move. It was the only time I've really seen it do that. And that's kind of what this is, because in that August move, you had like a massive push, and then it backs up, or excuse me, in March, you had a massive push that backs up, goes in kind of like a bottoming. In this case, it's stronger, but it didn't go low, but you had this kind of bottoming picture, and then there's this bottom that occurs right before it reverses backwards, and it does a really clean, like double up, kind of boom, boom, boom. And if it makes a higher low, it tends to be really strong. And what typically the reason it's doing that is because it's going across the downward creek and connecting with it higher up. So in that case, it's like you have a creek that's coming down from the top. So this one's like connecting really low, right? But in this case, sometimes that creek, it's met by a, and it kind of did that wrong. It'd be like this. Sorry. This like connects really, really low. And so it hits really low, it makes a spring, because there's a steeper incline to get there. But then other times this incline is like a lot softer. And so you actually hit it pretty high, and you get a nice bounce out, and it works. This pattern tends to play into that. These parallels tend to play into that quite neatly when you're going back up. So the good news is, even though we just did this really kind of off the cuff, and we're trying to just determine where that level is in the grand scheme of things, just double checking the numbers. I already had them on my other chart, but I just wanted to check again. I like to do things more than once if I can, and get the same result is fine. Slightly different. There tends to be a consistency in a lot of these build outs upward, and I really don't want to do this right this second, but there tends to be a huge amount of consistency in these walk downs as you come across these levels. So even though I know I did it both ways because I was doing AMC and GME, I'm going to show you this from this perspective. There tends to be a lot of consistency here, and this dip, if it does a spring, tends to come back into here very, very rapidly. And I got to go back and double check. I want to say that may end up being the area that I can't remember. I have to, again, double check. But there's a zone here that's really important, and I would have to figure out where it is. If it's the top or the bottom line, I'm not sure. That ends up being where the SOS is coming back out, because it's a triangulated move. Like, you end up finding that there's an intersection here that gets met. And it did happen, by the way, in 2020 on AMC. It's there. This is like the triangulated move. I just can't remember if it's the bottom one or the top one. And there is a significant difference. So, pretty significant. I'd have to go back and look. Yeah, because the top one here is actually kind of nice. It's like right up here. That certainly looks like maybe the end of the year going into next year. Probably be there. Right there. I'll have to look though. I'll have to go back and check. That's not going to happen today. Maybe tomorrow. I'll put a note on here. I always forgot it spelled parallel. There's also the wave, our wave top. because there's also like an S curve involved in this, and this is like when we talk about the up, down, up again, this would be like that. That's a little bit different. Maybe. I wonder where that came from. Seems right. I don't know. I don't remember where I drew this. Probably over here. I think I moved it. So that intersection's pretty solid going into 2026. Right there. Then what? Yeah. So you see how when you look at this upside down, you could make the case that yes, this is a spring upside down, but you could also make the case that that's a bit of a sign of weakness because it's failing to make higher highs here and then it's pushing low. So just like when we look at this in the regular, we were saying like this could be an up thrust. You flip it upside down. It looks like it could be an up thrust that drives you back down. When you flip it around, it's the same question. You just have like a different perspective on it, and it ends up being the same answer, which is, yeah, it could be that that's a spring that ends up bleeding out and going really high. Obviously, an upside down land, that's low, but what seems more likely is, to me anyways, is there's a push up here that's essentially like a distribution in upside down land where you're coming back into this zone. And that's really what we're kind of contesting here, is that it depends on if it drops 25 50s. Drops 25 50s, there's a chance this kind of beads up here and then pushes again. But realistically, it'd have to come above all the way back above this peak at 17. So basically like 1770. I have to go all the way back above there just to have a chance of maintaining bearishness long term. And it just doesn't seem very likely, does it? You've got pretty decent case right now that this creek is actually the correct one, albeit there's a couple of spots that you could pick out. I don't really want to get too deep into it again. Potentially for August 1st or around August 7th, that's the right zone. That's where we think AMC is on a low. Is this area right here, right? So there's some clear evidence that bears are trying to head that way, but this would be like a big hook, you know, for bears. And if it didn't go above the top, you're stuck, you know. That's really just an up thrust. And frankly, you could accomplish the same thing, and this is part of the reason why I wasn't really sold on the idea that it was going to go that high. You could almost accomplish the same thing here if you came to this point and then failed right there, because this is its own M. You could have another one going down, which is why I wasn't sold on the idea that this was necessarily going to come to 17, because conceptually, this is all that has to happen is it tries to get above, or I should say below, this 2567 area and does not succeed. That would be bullish, right? So if this has a reversal at that point, that's so low right now. The thing is, I've got this over here on like June 25th, but really it's already there. So it looks not great. It's there like right now. But in theory, yeah, this could come back up, and then I don't know. It's still ugly, but it doesn't really lend us a lot of confidence, right? To think that if that happened, what's to prevent this from happening and heading back up towards the top? Well, nothing, right? That's the answer. So each of these kind of swings goes back up. It creates a snowball effect, one to the next to the next. And I think that's where we were having some back and forth last week about GME. And I was really looking at that thinking that probably wasn't going to happen for a number of reasons, but it's there. So it could be a possibility at this stage. Oh, well. That's the downside anyways. It's basically the same thing that happened on this motion, but it's steeper. And then when it capitulates, it really goes the other way hard. And I'm talking about in the reversal, it would go very, very quick. So after August, you'd have this like massive slide. If each of these fails initially to make the advancement, then you'd have to see a failure here. But if you see that failure, it's going to go hard the other way. And I don't know for sure it's going to be the same exact timing, but we'll see. You could have kind of like a double fake out here. It's like an inversion of what we were thinking on AMC. Like that. Yeah. So it's like a hook into its earnings, but in reverse. And then you just melt. It's already back tested, it's failed. Bears have failed in that case. So that's the reversal. That's a cat ear. It's an S curve. You see how that works? It's not even like, it's not really that complex. So this is why I don't really want to break down here. It's just not a good spot for it. Don't want to lose 25. I think you're going to likely go all the way to 17. Yep. And then build out and have a reversal maybe into the next earnings, August. That could be quite bullish. Then we'd have to look at bigger picture what that looks like. I don't really know. First stop would be 70. Maybe a little slower than expected, though. September, October, November. It's really slow. Alternatively, this just backs up like it did here to the creek. The alternative's not that bad. That's this one. See how this had like that double bottom, pushes out, it jumps the creek, and then it advances. That's really what I was wanting to see here, was that jump right there, hold. So alternatively, yeah, it could just hold there, but I'm not sure with this offering that it's going to be able to do that. Yeah, maybe. There's got to be some kind of a news about acquisition or what they're using this money for that's really transformative. probably still could be sold down on that news, but I think that you just need to see it, you know. So this would have been right here a case for maybe not making that, but holding it up. But now I think we're going to have to make a case that this is actually going down low now. It's not really what I wanted to do anyways. And then have a big reversal later. Oh boy. Now I'm starting to rethink what the heck this was. Because now, when I did it before, I put this marker as the August move. Remember that? And we were looking at it like, we expand this out, and this is like a double top motion. Maybe this is like the August move. But now I'm like rethinking it. What if this expansion is that expansion? Like, because then you have an S curve up that goes high to the top. This marker right here was a signifying marker of like a halfway point. Right off the top there. You'd be doing the same thing right now. Could be. It would make sense because if you think about it, this like jumped the bigger creek. This jumps this creek. This could be like an iterative motion of similar to here. This went really far, yeah. We had talked about that previously on AMC. This is like a triple top. And if you look at AMC's move and compare it to 2020, the triple top is very different looking, but it's still there. And the motion and the breakout's still there. This is really similar to what we see in this kind of ultimate kind of buy-in and push back up option. I really think that's a similar motion in a lot of ways. This one just narrows in a different way. This is narrowing as well, like downward. This is narrowing upward, but they're both narrowing kind of wedge-like motions with 3 specific hits after the jump. I just didn't consider that something like left side, and we had divided it into parts. Now this could present itself as a big flush down. And it really does. When I drew it out, it looks like a macro version of that move, doesn't it? Right here, here. And see how this drove just beneath that previous floor? This would be like the same idea. Like driving it beneath that previous floor there. Back to this particular breakout node. And then this goes to this particular breakout node. So it's like a bigger version of the same concept. Right there versus right here. Because this is where this eventually like did break. Just like back here, this is where this eventually did break. Right there. So you're returning back to these markers where you broke out to check them out. And then the resulting action was after this big pump and drop back down. And I don't know what to make of the double top here. Don't get too complicated with it. This obviously has a peak above these tops too. It obviously goes really low, but this constitutes a breakout. Doesn't make me feel like it's going to go super far. And now I'm kind of wondering, because that peaks up there and then breaks from the same spot. I wonder if it's this level instead of the top. I wonder if it's this $30 mark. The top's easy, but I wonder if it's that $30 mark. The consolidation is also a possibility. 30 to 31. That's longer term. It's not necessarily for today. But that might make sense because it would be right in the area that you need to jump the major creek downward. this one right here. It's not very far though, is it? It does that. Well, Booksy, you know this. You've done this before. If that occurs, you've got a decent chance that there's going to be a rise to a similar point of interest. Well, the hook would have been down from the bottom anyways. We don't really have that information, so we'd have to know where that's going to be on the build out. And then that 50-50 is really low. If it's only here, it only goes to 53. This is what I didn't like about the 17 option. I'm just getting back to the exact same thing. So wonderful, right? This is no one ever. You guys are like, why would you do this? The implication was straightforward enough that like at some point it runs into some problems because the markers are just where they are. You can kind of do it in reverse if you think it has to be over the top, but like, yeah, there's some that are there, but there's also some that are right here going into September. This starts to make me think this is very likely because that 50% marker going into September, October, maybe a little bit more realistic from an August bottom. To have an August squeeze that goes just over the top here into September seems a little bit more reasonable, especially considering we think AMC runs at that time, around August 1st. Maybe the implication then is that GME is actually already like halfway up. And that, frankly, that's a better spot for it. So this implies like a squeeze that goes, yeah, not as far. This is what I didn't like about it, because when we did the same exact chart before, I've already done this, and I remember thinking if it goes to 17, the iterations get all screwed up, and it just looks like it's going to do some massive widening procedure, and it doesn't seem to be changing my mind about it right now. Yeah, that this is like a walk down to this level. And then there's like this massive push up, but you lose the all-time high kind of thesis there because the next one wouldn't happen until maybe February. But we were saying that's where we thought it kind of screws it up because it makes it sound like this guy. I just did it. I measured it. I know it sounds crazy, but I measured it out and I checked it out, and there was a lot of problems with it because from an iteration standpoint, we were looking at those anchors and where each one went up to. It starts becoming this bizarre, like, massive widening structure. Because then you go back to, like, the very first one, and it just starts looking like a huge distributive structure. Things get really messy really fast. And I'm not saying that's definitely the goal here, but it seems like that might be part of the goal. It's like a snowball's chance in heck that in Hades that it's going down to 4, but I'm missing something here. Like, where's that breakout? I think it was like $6, $7. That's so low. But it's not 7 though. That's the thing. I'm sorry. It's not 7. It's actually this one. It's $9. There may be one at 7, but that's really, really, really low. And I'm actually looking at the backup as a secondary option. See how this also has the backup in mind? Like where does that consolidate on that backup? This is also the previous backup and the consolidation. So the marker isn't, it isn't necessarily this low. That's like really low. It's probably more close to 970. This is where we ran into the same problem last time. And then it was like, there's this gap over here from 11 to 980. And that was the gap that we came back to. Yeah, that's a consolidation marker. That would make sense. So, yeah, this is like ridiculous. So this is the issue we ran into last time, was it starts doing this like craziness. Now you could say like, you could easily look at this and say, well, that's dumb. That's never going to happen, Booksy. Don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen. What I am saying is that these are trends that already exist. If you go into a distribution phase and you look at the way this is building out here, and then you look at it on the bigger picture as a build out, you start losing a case that this is actually very strong, because that motion right there, unless the spring holds up, which it could, you know, that's the part that I'm not really giving you when I do that. It does have the simplicity in some ways of a compression, and it does go rapid fire. Like this would probably be down in 2026, like really low. Again, which seems ridiculous because you're like, it's never going to do that. I know, but it's the way that this is trading, and I guess we'll see. We'll see. Maybe this makes a change and it doesn't go that low, and you see that development as a rising trend. That would change it. So like, for example, if this doesn't capitulate down to the new low and go back towards that trend and go to that next level at 17, which I don't want it to have happen, but if it doesn't do that, there's not really a case that the next markup should come down that low, right? If this were to come back and make a bottom at like 21 or higher low, for example, or frankly just stop at 25, then it changes the character of this, that the next markup range when it comes back is likewise going to show some weakness on the side of sellers. It's not going to drive it all the way through the floor each time back down. If instead you see this as a shorting scheme to drive the price the other way, then unfortunately it kind of loses, I think, it's sort of like an inverted momentum, right? You want bullish momentum, not bearish momentum. So you really don't want to see this flip bearish. Yeah, this goes down into January 2026. It does that. It's kind of the opposite what you want. It's just the way the cat ears are. I know I'm saying like the completely different thing right here. And it's still a possibility, you know, if this comes up over the top. But again, it's like if the same thing keeps happening, then you just have that same model. I think it's a bit ridiculous at some point to consider that. I think it may be more likely that this doesn't come all the way down. You can go back to like 26 or something going into December. And that, again, that would be further evidenced if this didn't make a low. If this made a higher high here or just barely dipped below instead of going all the way back to 17, if it only went to like 20 or again stayed above 26, that changes this fairly quickly. And I think there's stronger pieces of evidence there than, especially if you turn 30 into like a support region, 30 to 33, then it gives you a lot stronger evidence that that doesn't result in a long-term downtrend, but rather builds off the next support, which is really what you want to see with a squeeze motion. Yeah. That makes more sense. Maybe right here, 95 seems to be in view. That's where it left the trend behind. This area. I could see that. That's not over the previous top. I know, but I'm just saying. It isn't, but remember, if this iterates this way, then it actually makes sense to some degree because you would have this coming lower and then this coming lower. But there's question marks there. We're not there yet. We're going to have to see how it works out with the spring. We'll keep it simple from that point forward. I'm not going to try to do this every time. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. Not a lot of fuss over not a lot of information that we really don't have yet. But I want to do this. I'll probably do this tomorrow. Check out that. Be a good thing to do on a Thursday. Anyways, there's a lot of little pieces of data here that might be good. Maybe not all of it, but some of it. And unfortunately, again, it just sort of yields a question mark, I suppose. And I'd have to go into further detail about why I think this is kind of that result. And I know we've done it before, but it has to do with the overall, it's like a shrinking versus expanding of the iterative models here. Yeah, so the evidence is that this guy becomes like a version of the bigger picture. And this, by the way, makes sense as a result of it because when this guy walked down through the halfway point, we were just talking about it, and then it goes into its spring, just like this guy walking down through the halfway point, going into its spring, you know, yeah, like we thought it was this and blah, 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 blah. Sure, that's part of it, but then you look at it as like a bigger setup with the walk down here. Yeah, after it hits a spring here, it could be just like this one. You know, but the resulting action in this bottom was not to go to a new high. So this is another way to test consistency is like this went back up to this ledge, right? This reaction ledge. That's exactly what we just did, but in a completely different way. So one was more or less like a forward thinking model using the small picture, and another is like a little bit more of a backward thinking model using the macro to micro. So one is like micro to macro. This landed you at like 48, right? But then if you go from macro to micro, not micro to macro, it still lands you at 48. And that to me is a big deal. Like, okay, this is the same thing. So this creek breakout, if it drops low here, could end up resulting in the same exact price action, which takes you back to this level at like 47. Now, this did go into that area. It goes a little bit over the drop ledge, so on and so forth. You can interpret it however you want, but this basically would indicate that you're going to come back up to like 47 and probably not much further. And the evidence that we go a little bit further is right here with the micro. The micro to macro gets you a little bit above it. The macro to micro doesn't really get you far above that. So it would indicate that you're going to come up and be in that same realm. And if it did go, it may be in extended trading hours because this has a higher push. It goes up to like 85 or something in extended trading hours, right? Which is nearer this top. But you don't actually see that in regular trading hours. And then you do this all over again. So principally, again, there's different ways of analyzing the same information. If you take that micro, now it's completely different, right? This is the evidence based on macro to micro. This is the evidence based on micro to macro. So when you go micro to macro, it's telling us that we really want to get here. I know it's confusing, but we'll just say small to large, if that helps. Those words are kind of sound goofy when I say micro to macro, macro to micro, right? This is micro to macro interpretation where if this dropped low, you'd be suggesting that that's kind of the bigger picture goal. and it's going to work itself out. This actually is a little bit more macro to micro, which is a bit better. That's why I said I think this is kind of ridiculous, but it's there. And the door to 17 opens that door a little more than it would have been. This is a little more macro to micro, because in the macro, once this jumps up, if this hits a spring and then breaks and does it again, you're kind of repeating, right? So the expectation would be that you would kind of keep doing that. The problem, of course, being that that presents a lot of issues of, and it does, of a shrinking iteration, right? Because you'd end up having this whole thing play out, I suppose, again, minus the spring that's not there. You'd have the whole thing play out essentially the same way, but according to its own devices, not according to the fractal, just because. It'd have to come back and again lay up maybe on top of, and I don't think it'd go that high, but it would end up being like here. I'm just going to fudge it because it's not quite right. But lay up back on top of that creek cross, wherever that may be. So when we did this before, I don't know, I used this guy. I don't think this was like the best one, but it's there. So you could do something similar and have like a curve. Yeah, I don't know. I guess it'd go through like the halfway point or something like there. And then you'd have a build out here. That's kind of similar. You would back up and then run up again. And then do a really quick like consolidation. And then you pump into like a double top cat ear. This one would have like an SOW. This is micro to macro. Again, like kind of, or excuse me, this is big picture. I said it backwards, big to small. And then you would take that and drive that into a spring. And then it would do it again. But every time it happens, it gets weaker. So the motion itself is designed to exhaust. And then you end up with by the end, you'll end up with some kind of like a big picture cat ear here, basically. Like a double M cross. It always works itself out into itself again. So this is where things get dicey, because then you have this problem of like, well, is it just going to keep shrinking, you know? This is dumb, Booksy. Yeah, it is. I mean, I would admit that. At some point, you lose the narrative anyways when you try to do this stuff, because it gets so micro and minutia that it really doesn't matter. This probably goes into like a January move, and then it has to make a decision, because at some point it's got to make a move up or down. And usually it's like after that shrinking happens. This is further evidenced usually by some kind of a consolidation. So it'd be like right there. Because anytime there's a shrinking, there's always something like this, like a consolidation or a... yeah, that works quite nicely actually. Here, this one, we were just saying that probably comes a little above. Yeah, maybe it doesn't do it here. Doesn't really matter at that point. Something would have to change though. And you'd have to just like not do it again. Because it would just keep doing it forever, right? It starts to be barcoding. That could work. And then it gives you like a big cat ear. Right? I think we did this before, and we found that this could get quite long-winded. I don't want to go any further than that, but we've seen this. I keep saying that, and I do. We've seen this before. It gets quite long-winded. We're going to have dinner in a minute, okay? All right. Guys, I'm done. I'll see y'all tomorrow. It's not what I wanted to see, but we'll work it out. We'll work it out more tomorrow. Y'all have a good evening. I'll talk to you later.